She had learned very early in life that silence could be louder than screams. After her husband died, the world around her did not stop, slow down, or soften. People continued walking past her, laughing, planning their futures, while hers seemed to collapse into a narrow tunnel of responsibilities and unanswered questions. She was no longer just a woman with dreams. She was a mother with 2 children, a widow with bills, and a person forced to grow strong without being asked if she wanted to. Every morning she woke up before sunrise. Not because she enjoyed the quiet, but because it was the only time the house felt calm. The children slept in the next room, their breathing steady, unaware of the worries that lived in her chest. She would sit at the small kitchen table with a cup of cheap coffee, staring at the wall, thinking about how life had changed so suddenly. One day her husband had kissed her forehead and left for work. The next day, she was standing in a hospital hallway being told that he was gone. No warning. No proper explanation. Just a few short sentences that shattered everything. People said it was an accident. They said, these things happen. They said she should be grateful she still had her children. And while all of that might have been true, none of it answered the quiet questions that followed her everywhere. Why did the case feel rushed? Why were there documents she was never allowed to see? Why did certain people avoid eye contact when she asked simple questions? Over time, she learned that asking too much made others uncomfortable, so she stopped asking out loud. Instead, she listened. Months passed. Grief settled into her life like dust, covering everything slowly. She took small jobs, anything that paid. Cleaning offices at night, sorting files during the day, sometimes working 2 shifts back to back. Her hands were always busy, but her mind never rested. She noticed details others ignored, a name repeated on forms, a phone number written and crossed out, a property address mentioned more than once in papers related to her husband's work. It was an old mansion on the edge of a forgotten town. Most people called it cursed. Some called it a leftover from a violent past. Almost everyone agreed it was best left alone. The first time she saw a picture of the mansion, she felt something she could not explain. It was not fear. It was not curiosity. It felt familiar, like recognizing a place from a dream you forgot you had. The building was large, worn down, its windows dark and broken. Snow covered its steps in the photo, and the trees around it looked thin and tired. She stared at that picture longer than she meant to. Something about it pulled at her. She began researching quietly, using old computers at the public library. She read local news articles from years ago. Most of them avoided details. They spoke in careful words, never naming names, never explaining fully why the mansion had been seized and then abandoned. Some articles mentioned organized crime. Others hinted at financial crimes, money trails that vanished without answers. Over and over again, she saw the same pattern. Big headlines, small explanations, then silence. At first she told herself it meant nothing. She was tired. She was stressed. Her mind was trying to connect dots that were not there. But the feeling did not leave. Instead, it grew stronger. Late at night, after the children slept, she would open her notebook and write down everything she remembered about her husband's last months. The late nights, the sudden phone calls he took outside, the way he avoided certain questions, not because he did not trust her, but because he did not want to worry her. One memory returned again and again, a conversation they had weeks before his death. He had stood by the window watching the street, his voice low. He told her that sometimes the truth costs more than lies. She had laughed, thinking he was being dramatic. Now, that sentence felt heavy. It followed her everywhere. The mansion went up for auction quietly. No big announcements. No advertisements. Just a short notice buried in public records. The price shocked her. $500? Less than what she spent on groceries some months. She read the notice 3 times, thinking she misunderstood. Why would a building with so much land, even in terrible condition, be sold for almost nothing? She mentioned it once to a coworker, not expecting a reaction. The response was immediate and harsh. People said she was crazy to even think about it. They warned her about the mansion's past. They told stories of people who went near it and never returned. Most of the stories were likely exaggerated, but fear has a way of growing when shared. Soon, word spread that she was considering buying the place. The look she received changed. Pity turned into judgment. Concern turned into mockery. Some asked her why she would risk her children's safety. Others suggested she needed help, not property. A few laughed openly, shaking their heads, calling it the dumbest decision they had ever heard. She listened without arguing. She had learned that explaining herself rarely changed minds. Besides, she could not fully explain it anyway. The truth was, she did not know exactly why she felt pulled toward the mansion. She only knew she could not ignore it. On the day of the auction, she almost did not go. She stood in the doorway of her small apartment, coat in hand, heart racing. The children were at school. She told herself she was only going to watch to see what happened. No one else would be interested, she thought. And even if they were, she could walk away. The auction room was quiet. Too quiet. A handful of people sat scattered across the chairs, most of them looking bored. When the mansion's address was announced, a few chuckles echoed. No one raised a hand. The auctioneer repeated the starting price. Silence. She felt her palms sweat. Slowly, almost without thinking, she raised her hand. The room turned to look at her. Surprise flashed across faces. Someone whispered something she could not hear. The auctioneer confirmed her bid, then waited. Seconds passed. No one else spoke. The hammer came down. Just like that, the mansion was hers. Walking out of the building, she felt both light and heavy. She had just bought a place tied to fear and rumors, and yet she felt calmer than she had in months. The reactions came quickly. Phone calls, messages, warnings. Some people were angry as if her choice personally offended them. Others treated her like she had lost her mind completely. That evening, she sat with her children at the small dinner table. They talked about school, about friends, about simple things. She watched their faces as they laughed, unaware of the storm outside their small world. She wondered if she was being selfish. She wondered if she was putting them in danger. The doubts pressed in heavy and sharp, but underneath them was something stronger. A quiet certainty that this choice mattered. The next day, she drove to see the mansion in person. Snow covered the road as she approached. The building looked even larger up close. Time had not been kind to it. Paint peeled from the walls. The gates hung open, rusted and crooked. She parked the car and stood still for a moment, listening. The place was silent. No voices, no movement. Just the sound of wind and her own breathing as she walked toward the steps. Memories that were not hers seemed to cling to the walls. She could feel the weight of the past, not in a dramatic way, but like a deep sadness that never fully left. She did not rush. She placed her hand on the cold stone railing, grounding herself. Inside, the air was stale. Dust covered the floors. Furniture sat where it had been left, as if people had simply stood up and walked away one day. She moved carefully, opening doors, peering into rooms. There were signs of luxury everywhere, faded but undeniable. Chandeliers hung crooked. Curtains rotted near tall windows. The mansion had once been powerful. That much was clear. In one room, she noticed something strange. A wall that did not match the others. The pattern of the wood was slightly off. Most people would have ignored it. She did not. She touched it, pressed gently. It did not move, but the feeling stayed with her. She left the mansion before dark, locking the door behind her. Driving home, her mind raced. Fear mixed with excitement. Questions stacked on top of questions. She knew she could not bring the children there yet. Not until she understood more. That night, she dreamed of her husband. He stood in front of the mansion, saying nothing, just watching her. When she woke, her heart was pounding. She did not believe in signs, but she believed in instincts. And hers told her she was standing at the edge of something important. By the end of the week, the whispers grew louder. Some people said she was chasing ghosts. Others claimed she was trying to profit from tragedy. She ignored them all. She focused on practical things, cleaning schedules, repair estimates, legal paperwork, Still, every task seemed to circle back to the same truth. The mansion was not empty. Not really. Late one evening, while sorting through the documents that came with the purchase, she found an envelope tucked inside an old folder. It was addressed to no one. Inside were copies of financial records. Her hands trembled as she read. Familiar names appeared, including one she never expected to see again. Her husband's. The room felt suddenly too small. Her breathing slowed as she tried to understand what she was looking at. Dates matched. Locations aligned. The mansion's address appeared more than once. Whatever had happened to him was connected to this place. The thought both terrified and relieved her. She was not imagining things. She was not crazy. She closed the folder carefully and placed it back where she found it. Outside, the night was quiet, too quiet. She looked at her sleeping children, their faces peaceful, and made a silent promise. She would be careful. She would not rush. But she would not walk away either. People thought she was crazy for buying that mansion for $500. They saw only danger and madness. They did not see the truth beginning to surface. And they had no idea that what waited inside that abandoned building would soon change everything. She did not sleep that night. She lay awake listening to the small sounds of the apartment. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant noise of traffic, the quiet breathing of her children. The truth did not rush at her all at once. It came slowly, in fragments, like pieces of glass buried under the soil. Each piece was sharp, and each one cut a little deeper than the last. After buying the mansion, she learned very quickly that ownership did not mean control. The building belonged to her on paper, but its past still moved freely through its halls. She continued living in the small apartment with her children. The mansion was still only a place she visited during the day. She told herself it was for safety, but it was also because she needed time. Time to understand what she had stepped into. Time to prepare herself for whatever came next. Every visit to the mansion revealed something new. Sometimes it was small, like a mark on the wall that suggested a picture once hung there. Other times it was heavier, like the faint smell of old smoke trapped in the wood, as if arguments and secrets had soaked into the walls and refused to leave. She moved carefully, always aware of her surroundings, always listening. She began bringing a camera, not to document for anyone else, but to remind herself of what was real. Photos helped her see patterns. Hallways that seemed longer than they should be. Rooms that felt colder than others. A staircase that creaked in a way that sounded almost like footsteps following behind her. She reminded herself that old buildings made noise. Still, she never ignored her instincts. The key she had found stayed in her pocket for days before she finally decided to test it. She tried it on doors she already knew were empty. Nothing. Then she reached the basement. The air there was heavier, the ceiling lower. She stood still for a moment, listening. When she slid the key into a narrow metal door near the back wall, it turned smoothly. Inside was not what she expected. No weapons, no money. Just shelves lined with boxes, each labeled with dates and numbers. She opened one carefully. Inside were folders, thick with papers. Financial records, legal documents, handwritten notes. It was the kind of information that meant nothing on its own. But everything when connected. She did not read everything that day. She took one box, just one, and locked the door again. Carrying it felt heavy, not because of its weight, but because of what it represented. Proof. History. Risked at home that night. She spread the contents across the table after the children slept. She read slowly, making notes, marking names and dates. Again and again, the same companies appeared. The same properties, the same shell organizations, and woven quietly through it all was her husband's work. Not directly, not openly, but present, like a fingerprint left behind. She began to understand that he had not been a victim of bad luck. He had been standing too close to something powerful, something that preferred darkness to daylight. Fear followed her into her dreams. She dreamed of doors closing behind her, of voices whispering just out of reach. She woke often, checking the locks, watching her children sleep, Each morning, she told herself she could stop. She could sell the mansion. She could walk away. The thought never lasted. One afternoon, she noticed a man standing across the street from the mansion, pretending to look at his phone. He stayed there too long. When she moved, he moved. When she left, he watched. She did not confront him. She wrote it down. Her isolation deepened. Friends stopped calling. Some were afraid. Others were tired of hearing about the mansion. She did not blame them. This was not a story most people wanted to be part of. Still, the loneliness pressed in, heavy and quiet. She reached out to a journalist using an old email account. She did not explain everything. She only asked one question. Had there ever been an investigation connected to the mansion that was never completed? The reply came days later. Yes, and it had been shut down without explanation. That answer stayed with her. It confirmed what she already knew. She was standing in the middle of something unfinished. She returned to the basement again and again. Each time taking more documents, always careful not to take too much at once. She created copies, stored them in different places. She trusted no single location with the full truth. Her children began asking why she was tired all the time. She smiled and told them she was just busy. Inside, guilt grew. She wanted to protect them from the weight she carried, but she also wanted to build a future where silence did not win. Late one night, she heard a car outside her apartment. It idled longer than necessary. She watched from the window, heart pounding, until it drove away. She did not sleep after that. The deeper she went, the clearer it became that the mansion was not just a storage place. It had been a meeting point. A place where decisions were made quietly. Where money changed direction, where lives were altered without records. She found an old calendar in one of the boxes. Certain dates were circled. When she matched them to events in public records, her hands shook. Raids that happened elsewhere, arrests that never reached court, transfers that vanished. Her husband had been there. Not physically, perhaps, but his work had crossed paths with all of it. He had been tracing something that others had buried. One evening, as she locked the basement door, she felt something shift inside her. Not fear, determination. Whatever this was, it had already cost too much. Walking away would not make it disappear. She sat alone in the mansion's main hall, surrounded by dust and silence, and understood that part 2 of her life had begun the moment she unlocked that door, and there was no going back. By the time she accepted that the truth would never come gently, she had already changed in ways she did not fully recognize. The woman who once avoided attention now moved through her days with careful awareness. She did not rush. She did not panic. She watched, listened, and waited. The mansion had taught her that patience was not weakness. It was survival. Her visits became more structured. She no longer wandered room to room, guided only by instinct. She carried a list, a flashlight, gloves, and a small recorder she kept hidden in her bag. Not to create drama, not to expose anything yet, but to remember. Memory could be fragile under pressure. She could not afford to forget details. She began noticing signs that someone else had been inside the mansion recently. Dust disturbed near doorways. A window that was slightly open when she knew she had closed it. Footprints that did not match her own. None of it was obvious enough to prove anything. But together it formed a picture that made her stomach tighten. Instead of fear, she felt anger. Not loud anger, but a cold, steady kind. The kind that comes when you realize someone believes you are powerless. She locked every entrance, changed the old locks, and installed simple cameras using borrowed equipment. She told no one. At home, she kept life normal for her children. School mornings were the same. Homework at the kitchen table. Quiet jokes before bed. She refused to let the weight she carried fall onto their shoulders. When they slept, she worked. The documents from the basement became clearer as she sorted them. She created timelines. She matched names to events. Slowly, a story formed. Not one of sudden violence, but of quiet control. Of money moving through shadows. Of decisions made far from public view. Her husband's involvement was no longer just a theory. She found notes written in his familiar style. Short phrases. Coded references. Nothing that directly explained everything, but enough to confirm that he had known the risk. Enough to prove that he had chosen to continue anyway. One note stood out. It mentioned a deadline that had passed shortly before his death. It also mentioned a final safeguard. Something he believed would protect the truth if anything happened to him. She read that line over and over, her heart pounding. Whatever that safeguard was, it had not been discovered yet. She searched the mansion again, this time with purpose. She measured walls. She checked floorboards. She examined ceilings and furniture. Days passed like this, slow and careful. Then, in a room she had visited many times before, she'd noticed something different. A small mark near the base of a cabinet. She pressed and the wood shifted. Behind it was a narrow space, just large enough to hide a metal case. Her hands shook as she pulled it free. Inside were digital storage devices, wrapped in plastic. She did not open them there. She locked them away and left the mansion immediately. That night, after the children slept, she used an old laptop, not connected to the internet. What she found confirmed everything. Records, conversations, financial trails, all leading to people who still held power. This was not history. It was unfinished business. Fear returned, stronger this time, but it did not stop her. It sharpened her focus. She knew now that silence was exactly what those people relied on. She reached out to one person she trusted. A former legal worker who understood discretion. She shared only a fraction of what she had found. Even that was enough to cause concern. The advice was simple. Be careful. Document everything. Do not confront anyone directly. As days passed, pressure grew. The car returned to her street more often. Anonymous calls came and ended without words. She did not answer them. She documented them. Despite everything, there were moments of clarity. Standing in the mansion at sunrise, watching light spill across broken floors. In those moments, she felt connected to something larger than fear. She felt purpose. She realized then that part 3 of her story was not about discovery. It was about choice. She could no longer pretend she was only protecting her family. She was protecting the truth itself, and once that choice was made, there was no turning back. The days that followed felt heavier than anything she had lived through before. Knowledge had a weight, and now she carried more of it than she ever intended. What she had found could not be unseen, and it could not be returned to its hiding place without consequences. The mansion no longer felt like a silent witness. It felt like a living thing, waiting for the right moment to speak. She slowed her movements even more. Every decision was measured. Every step was planned. She understood now that speed was dangerous. The people connected to what she had uncovered relied on panic and mistakes. She refused to give them either. Her mornings stayed calm for the children. Breakfast was simple. Conversations stayed light. She learned to smile naturally again, not because she felt peace, but because fear did not deserve to show on her face. She listened carefully to their stories from school, grounding herself in normal life. Those moments reminded her why she could not fail. When she was alone, her focus sharpened. She reviewed the digital files again and again, cross-checking details. She made copies and stored them in different locations, never trusting one place with everything. She created timelines that showed how money moved and how silence followed. Patterns that once felt invisible now stood clear. She began to realize something unsettling. The truth had been protected not only by criminals, but by ordinary systems that preferred convenience over justice. Files had been misplaced, investigations delayed, questions discouraged. No single villain stood at the center. It was a web, and every strand mattered. One afternoon, she received a message from the journalist she had contacted earlier. It was brief and cautious. The investigation had indeed been stopped years ago. The official reason made little sense. The journalist warned her that reopening such matters often brought pressure from unexpected places. She thanked them and ended the conversation. She already felt the pressure. The car returned again. This time, it parked closer. She watched from behind the curtain, heart steady, mind alert. She did not call anyone. She wrote down the time, the color, the pattern of behavior. Fear was useful only when paired with action. At the mansion, she noticed more signs of intrusion. A lock scratched. A light switched off that she remembered leaving on. Someone was searching, but they did not know exactly what they were looking for. That gave her an advantage. She adjusted her strategy. She left certain areas looking untouched, even when she had already searched them. She moved important items to places that looked unimportant. She learned to think like someone who expected secrets to be hidden in obvious places. Late one evening, while sitting alone in the main hall, she allowed herself a moment of grief. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears for the life she thought she would have. For the husband who should have grown old beside her, for the children who deserved a simpler story. The tears passed, but the resolve stayed. She contacted legal support again, this time anonymously. She asked careful questions about whistleblower protections, about evidence handling, about safety. The answers were honest and unsettling. Protection existed, but it was never absolute. Safety depended on preparation. That night, she wrote letters. Not to send yet, but to prepare. Letters explaining her choices. Letters telling the truth in simple words. She sealed them and stored them away, just in case. The pressure increased slowly, like water rising. Anonymous calls became more frequent. One message warned her to stop digging. Another suggested she should think about her children. She listened, recorded, and did not respond. Despite everything, there were moments of clarity that surprised her. Standing in the mansion as rain tapped against broken windows, watching dust swirl in a beam of light, in those moments, she felt steady. This place had been used to hide lies. Now it would help expose them. She understood then that this part of her story was about endurance. Not dramatic confrontations or sudden victories, just the quiet strength to keep going when stopping would be easier. By the end of the month, she had gathered enough to know that the truth was ready to move beyond her alone. But she also knew that once she took that step, there would be no pause, no return to anonymity. She stood at the entrance of the mansion one last time before locking it for the night. The building loomed behind her, dark and patient. She did not feel fear as she once had. She felt readiness. Part 4 of her life was not about hiding anymore. It was about preparation, and she was nearly done. The moment she decided to let the truth leave her hands was quieter than she expected. There was no dramatic sound, no sudden rush of relief. Just a deep breath and the understanding that everything she had carried alone was about to become shared. The weight did not disappear, but it shifted, spreading beyond her shoulders. She waited for the right time. Not the perfect time, because that never comes, but a time when she had prepared enough to protect herself and her children. She arranged copies of everything she had found, placing them in sealed envelopes and secured digital storage. Nothing existed in only one place anymore. She had learned that survival depended on duplication. Her children sensed change, even if they did not understand it. They asked why she looked tired but calm at the same time. She told them that sometimes doing the right thing takes energy, but it also brings peace. They accepted this in the simple way children accept truths that adults complicate. The first step was not public. It was careful and controlled. She contacted authorities through legal channels, presenting evidence without emotion, without accusation. Just facts, dates, records, connections. She did not demand justice. She let the information speak. Waiting became the hardest part. Days passed without response. Then weeks. She reminded herself that systems move slowly, especially when they are forced to look at their own failures. During that time, the pressure outside did not stop. Cars still passed too slowly. Unknown numbers still appeared on her phone. But something had changed. The threats felt weaker, less certain. One afternoon, she received a call asking for a formal meeting. The voice on the other end was careful, professional. She agreed, choosing a public place and bringing legal support. She did not bring everything, only enough to confirm that she was serious. The meeting was longer than expected. Questions were asked, documents examined. Silence filled the spaces between words. When it ended, she felt drained, but also validated. For the first time since her husband's death, someone listened without dismissing her. The investigation reopened quietly. There were no headlines at first, just movement behind closed doors. Assets were reviewed, old cases pulled from storage. People who had believed themselves untouchable were forced to answer questions. At the mansion, activity increased. Officials came and went. The building no longer felt abandoned. Its silence was replaced by footsteps and voices. She watched from a distance, allowing the process to unfold. She was asked to testify later, not in a courtroom filled with cameras, but in controlled environments where truth mattered more than spectacle. She spoke plainly, refusing to dramatize. She told the story as it was lived, not as people wanted it told. Through it all, she protected her children's routine. School continued. Meals were shared. Laughter returned in small, careful doses. She learned that healing did not arrive all at once. It came in moments. Eventually, parts of the story reached the public. Not everything, and not all at once. Names were omitted. Details softened. But the core truth could no longer be denied. Her husband's role was recognized. His actions reframed. What had once been whispered was now recorded. People who had mocked her decision to buy the mansion changed their tone. Some apologized. Others stayed silent. She did not seek either response. Validation was not the goal. Truth was. The mansion itself changed purpose. It was no longer a place of secrets. Plans were made to repurpose it, to strip it of the power it once held. She walked through its halls one last time alone, touching the walls, acknowledging the past without being trapped by it. Standing in the main hall, she felt something close to closure. Not because everything was resolved, but because she had done what she could. She had chosen courage over comfort, truth over silence. Her life did not become perfect. There were still challenges, still moments of doubt, but the fear that once controlled her had lost its grip. People would tell her story in simple ways. They would say she was crazy for buying a Mafia mansion for $500. They would say she was brave. They would say she was lucky. None of those words fully captured the truth. The truth was simpler. She was a woman who refused to look away, a mother who chose honesty for her children, a widow who finished what her husband started. And when she closed the door on the mansion for the final time, she did not feel haunted. She felt free. Time did not slow down after the truth began moving. If anything, it sped up in ways she had not expected. Life did not pause to let her recover. It continued, demanding attention in small, ordinary moments that reminded her she was still a mother first. A woman learning how to live with consequences second. After the investigations became public knowledge in quiet circles, the world around her shifted. Some doors closed gently. Others opened in ways she did not fully trust. People who had never noticed her before suddenly spoke carefully, choosing words as if they mattered more now. She noticed the change, but she did not let it shape her behavior. Attention was temporary. Character was not. Her children adapted faster than she did. Children often do. They accepted new routines, new conversations, new boundaries, without questioning every reason. She was grateful for that. She kept their lives simple on purpose. School, home, meals, small celebrations. She learned that stability was not about having everything figured out, but about showing up consistently. She moved out of the apartment not long after. Not into the mansion, but into a modest place, closer to work and school. She wanted distance from the building that had held so much weight. The mansion no longer belonged to her emotionally, even if her name remained tied to it on paper. Some places are meant to be passed through, not lived in. The quiet that followed felt unfamiliar. For months, her days had been filled with tension, observation, careful planning. Now there were moments where nothing demanded immediate action. At first, that silence made her uneasy. She found herself checking locks twice, listening for sounds that were no longer there. Healing, she learned, did not arrive politely. It unsettled you before it settled in. She continued cooperating when asked, always careful, always grounded in facts. She refused to become a symbol. She refused interviews that felt more interested in drama than truth. When she did speak, she spoke simply. About responsibility. About choice. About how silence can harm just as much as action. There were nights when memories returned uninvited. Not only of fear, but of love. Of the life she had shared with her husband before shadows entered it. She allowed herself to remember without guilt. Love did not disappear just because the story had changed. One evening, while helping her children with homework, she realized something important. She was no longer living in reaction. She was living forward. The thought surprised her. It felt like noticing daylight after a long winter. People still whispered about the mansion. Stories grow where facts leave gaps. She let them talk. The building would always carry its past. That was not her burden anymore. She began volunteering quietly, helping others navigate systems that felt overwhelming. Paperwork, housing questions, legal referrals. She did not share her story unless it helped someone else feel less alone. In those moments, she felt something close to purpose, not born from pain, but shaped by it. Her children grew more confident. They laughed louder. They asked bigger questions. She answered honestly, in ways they could understand without fear. She wanted them to grow up knowing that truth was not something to be afraid of. Sometimes, she drove past the road that led to the mansion. She did not stop. She did not need to. The building no longer called to her. It had given up what it was holding. She learned that courage was not a single act. It was a series of quiet decisions made over time. Decisions to stay present, to stay honest, to keep going even when the applause faded. This part of her life was not about uncovering secrets or standing against power. It was about rebuilding, about learning who she was without fear guiding every step, and slowly, without ceremony, she realized she was no longer defined by what she had survived. She was defined by how she chose to live next. Life after everything settled did not feel dramatic. There were no sharp turns, no sudden victories, no moment where she could say that the past was fully behind her. Instead, life unfolded quietly, in ordinary ways that slowly rebuilt what had been shaken. This part of her journey was not about uncovering truth or standing against hidden power. It was about learning how to live honestly after truth had already done its work. She noticed the change first in herself. She no longer woke up with a tight feeling in her chest. The mornings felt lighter, even when the day ahead was full. She moved with more confidence, not because she believed nothing bad could happen, but because she trusted herself to handle whatever came. Her children changed too. They grew steadier, less watchful. The questions they asked shifted from worry to curiosity. They talked about the future without hesitation, about places they wanted to see and things they wanted to become. She listened carefully, understanding that their sense of safety had been slowly restored. Work became more than survival. She chose tasks she believed in, helping people who felt lost inside systems that did not explain themselves. She remembered how confusing everything had once felt, and used that memory to guide her patience. She never rushed anyone. She knew healing moved at its own pace. Sometimes people recognized her, though not often. When they did, they spoke carefully, as if unsure which version of her story she wanted acknowledged. She kept those conversations short. Her life was not a lesson for display. It was something lived. The mansion still existed in the background of conversations, but it no longer defined her. It was a chapter that had closed, even if others kept rereading it. She understood that people are often more comfortable with stories than with real people. There were moments when the past turned unexpectedly. A sound, a smell, a piece of news that echoed old fears. When that happened, she did not push it away. She paused, breathed, and reminded herself where she stood now. Fear no longer made decisions for her. She began keeping a small journal again, not to track danger or clues, but to record ordinary moments. Things worth remembering. Laughter at dinner. A quiet walk. A conversation that mattered. Writing helped her see how far she had come. One afternoon, she realized something that surprised her. She felt proud. Not in a loud way, but in a steady, grounded way. proud of the choices she had made when walking away would have been easier. This part of her life was not about proving anything. It was about presence, about choosing honesty every day, even when no one was watching. And as time moved forward, she understood that survival had turned into strength, and strength had turned into peace. Time continued to move forward, not with urgency, but with purpose. This stage of her life was shaped less by events and more by understanding. She began to notice how deeply the past had changed the way she looked at people, especially those who carried quiet pain. She recognized it now, even when others missed it. Her days followed a steady rhythm. Mornings began early, filled with simple routines that grounded her. She found comfort in repetition, in knowing what came next. Stability, she learned, was not boring. It was healing. The children grew older, more independent. They trusted her fully, and that trust became her greatest responsibility. She chose her words carefully when talking about life, about mistakes, about courage. She wanted them to understand that strength did not mean never being afraid. It meant acting with honesty despite fear. Sometimes people asked her why she never wrote a book or told her story publicly. She smiled and said the truth belonged to more than just her. Some stories are meant to be lived quietly, not turned into spectacle. She began mentoring others informally. Women who had lost their footing. Parents overwhelmed by sudden change. She did not position herself as an expert. She simply listened. Listening, she discovered, was often more powerful than advice. There were moments when she felt the weight of everything she had survived. On those days, she rested. She no longer pushed herself to be strong all the time. Rest became part of strength. She understood now that healing was not a destination. It was a relationship with oneself, renewed daily. This part of her journey was not about the mansion or secrets or danger. It was about meaning. About choosing a life guided by clarity instead of fear, and quietly, without announcement. She became someone others trusted not because of what she had uncovered, but because of how she lived afterward as the years continued. She learned that life did not reward people for surviving hard things. It simply offered chances to grow after them. This stage of her journey unfolded slowly, shaped by reflection rather than reaction. She no longer felt pulled by the past, but she respected the lessons it had given her. Her sense of purpose became clearer. She chose work that aligned with her values, even when it paid less or offered fewer rewards. Peace, she learned, was worth more than recognition. She measured success by how steady her life felt, not by how impressive it looked from the outside. The children became young adults in small, meaningful steps. Responsibility arrived gradually through shared chores, honest conversations, and mutual respect. She treated them not as fragile beings, but as growing individuals, learning how to stand on their own. There were moments when the world tested her resolve again. Unexpected setbacks, financial strain, difficult decisions that had no perfect answers. This time, she did not panic. She approached problems with patience, trusting herself to respond instead of react. She stayed connected to a small circle of people who valued sincerity over status. They shared meals, stories, and silence without expectation. Community, she realized, was built through consistency, not convenience. Sometimes she reflected on the woman she had been before everything changed. She did not judge her. She honored her. That woman had made the best choices she could with the information she had at the time. The past no longer felt like something she needed to escape. It felt like a foundation she had outgrown. This part of her life was not dramatic. It was steady. It was real. And it was enough. She understood now that true strength did not announce itself. It lived quietly in daily choices made with integrity. The final stretch of her journey did not feel like an ending. It felt more like a settling, the way dust falls after something heavy has passed through. Life had become quieter, but not empty. It carried meaning in ways she had once believed only came from struggle. She no longer measured her days by what needed fixing. She measured them by presence, by how fully she listened, by how calmly she responded when things did not go as planned. This shift had taken years, not weeks. Growth had arrived slowly, shaped by repetition and patience. Her relationship with her children evolved again. They no longer needed constant guidance, but they still needed connection. Conversations became deeper, more thoughtful. She shared lessons without preaching, letting experience speak for itself. Trust flowed both ways now. There were times she was asked to look back, to explain everything that had happened long ago. She chose carefully when to speak and when to remain silent. Not every truth needed an audience. Some truths were meant to live quietly inside the people who carried them. She understood now that survival had never been the goal. Living fully was, and living fully meant accepting uncertainty without fear. She kept her life simple. Fewer possessions. Fewer commitments. More intention. She found joy in ordinary routines, in shared meals. In calm evenings that asked nothing from her, looking back no longer brought pain. It brought clarity. She saw her past not as a series of threats, but as a path that had led her to herself. This chapter was not about closure. It was about continuity. About choosing to live honestly. Long after the story stopped being interesting to others, and in that quiet continuation, she found peace. This phase of her life unfolded with a deeper sense of awareness. She had learned that endings were rarely final, and beginnings often arrived quietly. What mattered most now was how she carried herself through ordinary days, how she treated people when there was nothing to gain, and how she responded when old fears tried to return. She noticed how easily people around her rushed through life. Deadlines, noise, constant urgency. She chose a different pace. She listened more than she spoke. She allowed silence to exist without filling it. In that space, she found clarity. Her children, now older, brought new conversations into her life. Questions about responsibility, fairness, and courage surfaced naturally. She answered honestly, never pretending to have perfect solutions. She wanted them to see that strength came from humility as much as confidence. Work continued to evolve. She took on roles that allowed her to guide without controlling, to support without overshadowing. Trust became her most valuable tool. People responded to it in ways that surprised her. There were moments when reminders of the past appeared unexpectedly. A building that looked familiar. A story in the news that echoed old patterns. She felt the memory, acknowledged it, and let it pass. The past no longer demanded her its attention. She began to understand that peace was not something found after everything was resolved. It was something practiced daily, through patience and choice. This part of her story was quieter, but no less meaningful. It was about living with intention long after the spotlight faded. In choosing integrity when no one was watching, she moved forward without needing proof of progress. Trusting that the life she was building spoke for itself, this chapter of her life did not arrive with any clear signal. There was no moment where she could point and say that everything had changed again. Instead, change showed itself in small choices and steady habits. She had learned to recognize growth not by excitement but by calm. She spent more time observing the world around her. People spoke loudly about success, about being seen, about winning. She quietly focused on being steady. She believed now that steadiness was a form of strength many people overlooked. Her days were filled with purpose, but not pressure. She worked, she cared, she rested when needed. Balance was no longer something she chased. It was something she practiced. The children brought new energy into the home. Their independence created space for deeper trust. She allowed them to make mistakes, knowing that guidance mattered more than control. Watching them grow reminded her that life continued forward. Regardless of past storms, she sometimes thought about the woman she had been when she first stepped into uncertainty. She felt compassion for her. That woman had acted with courage even when she did not fully understand the cost. People occasionally asked her for advice. Sensing something grounded in her presence, she never gave dramatic answers. She spoke about honesty, patience, and choosing what mattered most. This part of her story was not dramatic, but it was true. It reflected a life lived with intention after chaos had passed. She understood now that the deepest victories were quiet ones, earned slowly and protected carefully.